My dissertation has been to contribute to develop Umwelt concepts and models. So I clearly situate myself within the tradition after Jakob von Uexküll, which is an important stream in current biosemiotics, and to attempt to describe the semiotic mechanisms regulating the wolf and sheep populations, particularly in Norway. And I will return to that case study where I try to combine understanding of ecological reality with cultural understanding of that whole complex. And as has already been mentioned, phenomenology is another very central keyword here. And the way I interpret human theory, these are not opposite subjects, but I try to interpret Umwelt theory as a genuine phenomenological theory and point of view. One key concept here is, as you see in the title, Umwelt transition, which is intended as an Uexküllian notion of environmental change. I will return to the definition of that, but the idea is to phrase environmental change from the perspective of Umwelt creatures, living creatures. So how does environmental change manifest itself from the perspective of the living experiencing bodies? Here's an overview of the publications included in the dissertations. There are 7 papers, and the first 3 ones are mostly theoretical, and they are called Umwelt transitions, Uexküllian environmental change, steps to a semiotics of being, and semiotics of being and Uexküllian phenomenology. The 4th, mapping human impact, expanding horizons into disciplinary integration, addresses methodology and partly human ecology, as does the 5th paper, the global species, which also has some perspectives on what you could call Anthropocene studies, and also some new perspectives on globalization with a very, very long time span. The last 2 papers, Wolfland and I Wolf, the ecology of existence, are related to the case study of this dissertation on Norwegian wolf management, even though the last one contains some more philosophical theorizing as well. Now the case study, as I said, I try to approach it from different angles. And I'm not myself either an ethologist or as such a cultural semiotician, but I try to use semiotics to get an overview as a generalist of very different kinds of facts and studies related to wolves and how they act, in fact, in the wild, and how they are perceived in political circumstances and in other cultural circumstances. So I try to use this overview of cultural imagery of wolves and sheep, for instance, particularly in the Norwegian situation, to interpret and understand the political debate about wolf conservation management, and to understand why there is hostile resistance from an outspoken minority in Norway and many other countries to wolf conservation. And sheep is included here because in the Norwegian context, predation on sheep carried out by predators is a very central political topic, even though you can discuss whether the wolf's role is important in ecological terms. So in this way, the cultural side turns into a kind of fact check of statements in the political discourse as well. This is the table of contents of the dissertation. You see here that is divided into 6 sections. First, addressing some basic biosemiotic theory, and here the title is updated compared to what you find in the actual dissertation. Second chapter is the one that is first of all devoted to developing the understanding of Umwelt theory as phenomenology. And here I also treat Husserl and partly Bonaparte and some others. The third one is mostly devoted to methodology, or what I call Umwelt mapping. The fourth one is devoted to the case study. And then there's a summary of articles, and finally conclusions and further developments, where I admit some weaknesses with some of the methods I've tried out and try to suggest how they can be developed further, and also have some future-oriented perspectives on Norwegian wolf management. This is another version of what appears as a figure here over the levels of biosemiosis in the printed dissertation. And here you see that I operate in understanding semiotics and biosemiotics with a 3-level scheme, where the central one is the perceptual semiosis or organismic semiosis, and I operate with one sub-perceptual category and one super-perceptual category. So when I use the term superorganism, for instance, it is with this in mind. It's a formal definition relating sub and super perceptual semiosis to this central layer. So I define perception as the central layer, but it's intertwined with and connected to these higher and lower levels of semiosis. And in this context, I present or interpret phenomenology as one subfield in this sense of semiotics. And it deals with one level, one layer of semiosis, namely phenomena. Jakob von Uskil is very central in my work, both in this dissertation and what I have done previously as well. Many of you are familiar with Umwelt theory, so I will not say much about the theory as such, but to the right here you see some of the notions introduced or presented in this dissertation that deals with the Umwelt concept and introduces some new coinages. And the most central one is Umwelt transition, from the title also, which can be defined as a lasting systematic change within the life cycle of a being, considered from an ontogenetic, phylogenetic, or cultural perspective, from one typical appearance of its Umwelt to another. So I use the term transition for the change from one typical Umwelt to another typical Umwelt, for what is, in one sense or another, the same creature. But this can be applied at different time scales and other scales and so on. Experience phenomenology has been mentioned, and Umwelt mapping is a key term in the methodology I'm presenting. Relational Umwelt map is one term that was coined by Karl, which I have, he suggested it to me. So I have described in the dissertation also how that can be applied as a name for some of the figures I present in paper 4. Let me see, yep. And further I apply the terms Umwelt scenarios and Umwelt technology. And that's perhaps typical of my work as well, that I have a strong interest in trying to use Umwelt theory in something akin to predictions, or to just try to describe possible futures. I should mention as well that the term Umwelt transition implies a fundamental critique of Uskil, since Uskil himself did not have any historical Umwelt theory, but rather had an ahistorical one. So there's elements in several of these kinds of critique of Huxley's original Umwelt theory. Now here you see a quote from Husserl, which I use as proof that his notion of Lebenswelt, which is quite central in phenomenology, is not necessarily restricted to the human realm as it is usually conceived of. So he writes, as the correlative abstraction teaches us, man and everything else that is real in animal form is, after all, something real having two strata and is given as such in pure experience, purely in the life world, Lebenswelt. The individual psychology must then be the foundation for a sociology and likewise for a science of objectified spirit, of particular things, which after all refers in its own way to the human being as person, that is, to the life of the soul. And this I have emphasized. And all this can be applied by analogy, just as far as the analogy reaches to animal society, to the surrounding world, or Husserl used in the original Umwelt, with its specifically animal signification. So this is one example of a clear instance where Husserl uses the Umwelt notion in an experience sense, and which is also proof that these two terms are hardly overlapping. I do not deny that Husserl's Lebenswelt notion is first of all meant for the human realm, but it's interesting to point out that we can discuss to what extent they can overlap as well. Now, another central notion in the dissertation is semiotic causation, and I was made aware yesterday by way of the written evaluations from the opponents, or Jesper's evaluation, that he has coined this term, and apparently before me and dealt with it in length. So I must admit my ignorance and acknowledge his coinage, and I'm looking forward to see in how far what you have intended by that concept equals what I intend with this concept. I did not write at length about it in this dissertation, but I think we agree that this could be a central notion in describing biosemiosis as such in many very central life processes. There are some other names, including Wendy Wheeler and Peter Wills, which I mentioned in the dissertation, that have said similar things content-wise. But I think it's important to develop further such a notion and thus to relate semiotics to causation, which also makes clear how a biosemiotic understanding is radically different on some point from a mechanistic, more mainstream understanding of science and of causation. I will mention one example now of how I have applied the term of semiotic causation. And here I will read excerpts from the thesis. As we saw in the previous paragraph, Umwelt scenarios, some of these scenarios might in fact result in recurring problems with wolf depredation on sheep of comparable extent to what is the case today. So the no wolf scenario here implies the idea that there might be no wolves on Norwegian territory, no resident wolves, but even so you would most likely have migrants from Sweden, Finland, and or Russia, and those migrants would be more likely to prey on sheep. We observe that the future development of Norwegian sheep husbandry and Norwegian wolf ecology is overall independent of each other, and that one does not determine the prospects of the other in strictly ecological terms. Simultaneously, the future prospects of Norwegian wolf management depends on the future development of sheep husbandry and Norwegian agriculture at large, not in ecological terms, properly speaking, but in perceptual and thus semiotic terms, or, as we may say, in terms of semiotic causation. As a mirror image of agricultural developments, future wolf symbolicity will, in its negative aspects, likely reflect the perceptions of and in agriculture, and the development of this symbolicity is in turn decisive for the prospects of wolf conservation in Norway. I claim that the wolf is a poster boy for other predators, because whenever people think about predation, they tend to think about the wolf, partly unfairly. And I call it a scapegoat, because it's blamed for societal developments that it has little to do with, including the difficulties for small-scale farming in Norway and practically all other nations with economic growth. This is a figure of what I have called here the phenomenal fields, which refers to Friedrich Bock, a colleague of Extrude, which I have adapted to a quite different usage, because Brock, like Extrude, did not develop any historical perspective. Quite the opposite, he said that what he and Extrude presented was more about what you could call it a static typology. But in this context, I have taken some of these simple ideas and tried to develop them in a setting where the Unger theory is a diachronic historical theory and can also be applied to describe change over time. And you see also here that there's a threefold division of here the human umwelt. I've divided it into a core umwelt, which corresponds most closely to what people usually think about when they think about umwelt, and a mediated umwelt and a conceptual umwelt. And I think such a finer distinction is necessary to develop if we are to describe the human umwelt in much detail. So, briefly speaking, the core umwelt refers to umwelt objects encountered, the mediated umwelt objects anticipated, and the conceptual umwelt objects conceptualized. And these distinctions are very useful, it turns out, in the concluding sixth section of the dissertation, when we try to evaluate the Norwegian wolf management as well. Because we do not get that far if we just operate with a simplified umwelt model, referring only to actual encounters. Very few encounter shy wolves, for instance, yet people have a lot of perception that can be related to wolves, and even behavior. Here's an example where I have applied the very simplest version of these phenomenal fields, which is divided into four and refer to the main four functional cycles described by Extrude, namely what we could call the field of food, of the enemy, of the partner, and of medium. And here I have interpreted partner rather than himself. I refer to social companions in general. And this is a depiction, step by step, in very simplified form, of wolves becoming dogs, because dogs are the result of domestication and had the wolf as an ancestor. And what you see here, if you can read the small print, is that the human turns into more and more of a social partner and less of an enemy, until eventually it is not an enemy of the dog at all, perhaps. So the idea here is that human transition can, in simplified terms, be described by using these phenomenal fields, a transition from one set of social relations, for instance, to another. Now we take the human perspective and try to sum up the changing relations to sheep and to wolves. And here you see the process of the wolf becoming less of an enemy and more of a social partner, at least in this sense of mediated Umwelt or conceptual Umwelt. And simultaneously you see that the wolf becomes less of an enemy in the same mediated or conceptual sense. But it still remains an enemy to an outspoken minority, even though a majority now have a positive perception of wolves. As for sheep, you see that sheep have traditionally been both food and social partner, because there have typically been quite a few sheep for each farmer, and then there are conditions for social, well, what I would call social interaction. But with more industrial forms of agriculture, as we increasingly see today, that sociality is on its way out. It's a huge difference between a farmer with 20 sheep and one with 400. If you consider whether they can relate individually to each sheep, for instance, and if you see simply on how much time they can spend with each sheep. With more mechanized forms, there's less sociality. Now, I'll just show briefly one further application, if not development, of this tripartite model of the human Umwelt. This is something I presented a couple of months ago at a conference on raising animals and predators in Norway. And what you see here to the left is that we can say that the field of nutrition, of food, or resources, and the field of the medium, they are both related to a kind of conflict of interest. So we can understand partly the opposition to carnivores and to wolves by realizing that we compete with the wolf, in a sense, for space and for prey, sheep, for instance. Marked in yellow, you see that there's also another kind of conflict which rather goes on in the mind of humans, whether to perceive wolves in a friendly or unfriendly manner, whether to relate to them as co-inhabitants of the forest, or whether to relate to them as enemies that do not really belong there. And to the right you see a numbered list of features of perception and attitude and so on, which is one example of how these 12 subfields of this model can be used to specify much more in detail, even presented only in words, such as here, how people relate to wolves and to sheep, for instance. So the models, the figures in this dissertation themselves are, with intention, extremely simple, but any application has to be much more advanced than that.